Okay, good. So, hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Komal Kanodia, working as a brand manager with IVA, a division of MCure. MCure is a pioneer in the field of gynecology and IVF, and we at IVA are on a mission of nurturing 28 days of ovarian cycle. And hence, all our webinars are called as Programming 28 webinars. Along with Programming 28 webinars, we have taken a lot of other digital initiatives, and Materna School of Art is one of them. I would like to thank Oasis Fertility Clinic and Dr. Kavya Rao for giving us this opportunity to host this webinar today. So thank you so much, Dr. Kavya. So before starting the webinar, I'll just would like to give a brief intro of Oasis Clinic. So about Oasis is a unit of Sadhguru Healthcare Service Private Limited, founded in November 2009. And the founders were Dr. Durga Rao and Mr. Kiran Gedela. It is an ICMR registered and ISO 2001 certified organization, member of ASRM and FOXY, selected as Power Brand 2018, 2019, and 2020 by IVF India, recipient of the Best Asian Healthcare Brand 2019 from the Economic Times Group, largest chain of fertility clinic in Telugu state, second in South and third largest in India, credited by Times of India 4 times in a row. Currently, Oasis is operating in 12 centers across the country, and 3,000 IVF cycles are getting conducted annually and 3,000 IUI cycles. So far, Oasis has made more than 30,000 family happy, and they have collective clinical experience of 300 years with 30 consultants. They have dedicated embryology lab in each center with 20 embryologists. High on technology, EWS, ARTs, AI, Gary Embroscope, all are these high-end technologies are available with Oasis Fertility Clinic. EndroLife, exclusive male fertility clinic, and OSHERM, dedicated wing for academics. So now would like to introduce Dr. Jalagam Kavya Rao. So doctor is basically right now working as a clinical head and infertility specialist at Oasis Fertility. She has overall 6 years of work experience. The subject matter of laparoscopy and infertility in the field of medicine interests her, and she passionately pursues it. She has many papers and poster presentation credited to her in various conferences. She is a member of ISAR. She has completed her MBBS and MS from the NTI University, Vijayawada, and completed fellowship in reproductive medicine. So very warm welcome, Dr. Jalagam, to this webinar. And now I hand over the mic to you. So please continue with your session.
Thank you, Komal, for your warm introduction, and I thank MCure also for this opportunity so that I can interact with all my colleagues, doctors, co-friends, and everyone. So today I would like to talk about a topic which is a very common topic for us. Can you please tell me if my screen is shared?
Yes, doctor, it's visible.
Yeah. So that is adenomyosis. As we know, adenomyosis is a very common thing which we see on our ultrasound examination in day-to-day infertility practice. So I myself am Dr. Kavya. So I welcome you all for today's webinar. So what is adenomyosis? As we all know, it is defined as the presence of heterotropic endometrial glands and stroma within the myometrium of the uterus. So this is usually accompanied by a myometrial hyperplasia and infiltration of the inflammatory cells of the surrounding myometrium. This looks a bit complicated. So in a simple language, I'll tell you what is adenomyosis. Is a bulky uterus for a patient to understand easily. So now normal uterus is actually seen in particular dimensions, but whereas in an adenomyotic uterus, the dimensions are more, and ultrasound, we will be discussing further in my presentation how to pick up an adenomyotic uterus on ultrasound. So coming to its prevalence and incidence, due to lack of standard diagnostic criteria, the actual incidence of adenomyosis is not known, because in earlier years, this condition was diagnosed only post-operatively. On hysterectomy specimens, they used to diagnose this adenomyosis. But with the advent of the newer imaging techniques, the adenomyosis is being identified easily, and with more simplified and definitive criteria have been come up to diagnose this condition. In a study using transvaginal ultrasound at a gynecologic clinic in London, the incidence of adenomyosis in infertile population was 20.9%, which is nearly 21. And in a large cross-sectional study done at Spain, the prevalence of adenomyosis was 24.4% amongst the patients undergoing ART. So out of all the clientele, 20% of the infertile population will be suffering from adenomyosis. This was comparable to the prevalence in the usual symptomatic population also. When we look into the cases of abnormal uterine bleeding in perimenopausal age group, 45% of the patients have adenomyosis on histopathology, which is till before 2011. So what is the pathogenesis? What is happening actually inside? How is adenomyosis developing in the uterus? Two main theories can be attributed to this. One is endomyometrial invagination of the endometrium. That is, the endometrial lining, the inner lining of the endometrium is being invaginated into the myometrium because of myometrial weakness or altered immunological activity. The second one is the metaplasia of displaced embryonic pluripotent Mullerian remnants or differentiation of adult stem cells. I would be explaining in detail about these two mechanisms because this is important for us to understand, explain our patient why is it seen very frequently these days. So this invagination of the endometrial basalis layer is happening for hyperestrogenism. That means the increased estrogen content in the adenomyotic uteruses are seen. This is also proved when the adenomyotic people, I mean the patients, it is tested in the menstrual blood that there is high estrogen content. Also, because of this high estrogen content, there is hyperperistalsis, irritability of the uterus. This estrogen produces oxytocin also. And because of this irritability in the uterus, there is a tissue microtrauma. So this microtrauma is also called, this tissue microtrauma is also called a tissue irritability. Where it is happening? It is happening at the junctional zone. So in uterus, we will be having three layers. One is endometrium and myometrium. So in between this endometrium and myometrium, two layers we will be having, and there will be a junctional zone in between. So this tissue trauma is happening at the junctional zone, which may lead to abnormal alteration of the stem cell niche, allowing them to differentiate their progeny towards the myometrium rather to the endometrium. That means there is an abnormal proliferation towards outside of the endometrium. So because of this invasion and because of this tissue injury and repair and also the stem cells abnormal progeny, all these things are attributing to the inflammation, neuroangiogenesis, proliferation and fibrosis of the uterus. So there are various pathogenic mediators in adenomyosis attributing to pain, AUB, that is dysfunctional uterine bleeding and infertility also. So what is this estrogen doing in the uterus? Normally, the estrogen receptors are estrogen receptor alpha and beta, but here the normal healing process is not happening. This normal healing process, this requires the estrogen to stop. When a tissue trauma occurs, the estrogen production has to stop. But in adenomyotic uterus, that is not happening because even after the estrogen is stopping, there is an stimulated oxytocin which is left inside the uterus, which is stimulating the uterus repeatedly. And because of this repeated auto-traumatization, the condition gets worsened with each and every cycle. So in a simpler form, I have kept this diagrammatic representation. So because of increased estradiol, this estradiol is hyperestrogenism. It is acting at two receptors. One is alpha and beta. This alpha acts at the level of the tissue, causes tissue traumatization, and beta acts at the level of the endometrial proliferation. It stimulates the endometrial progeny towards the myometrium. Both are causing the invagination of the endometrium, right? So why is this estradiol being increased more? And this estradiol is also not getting converted into the lesser potent form because there are few studies where the patients have been diagnosed with this 17 beta HSD2 deficiency, where the estrogen, the efficiency of the estrogen to get converted to estrogen is also lacking. Also, there are studies on the P450 aromatase enzyme deficiency in the patients of this particular group of adenomyosis. So when you see, when the TIR mechanism is activated, there is release of interleukins, COX-2, PGE2, and this PGE2 is again increasing the P450 aromatization. Okay, so this is a completely interlinked process. So not going into further details, these are the simpler diagrams which can explain easily in a better language. So in this picture, you can see endometrium and myometrium clearly. The myometrium is darker pink and the endometrium is lighter pink. So there are some ectopic endometrial cells in the inner layer of the myometrium, which can be seen. And the junctional zone is the line, the greener line, which is shown in between the endo and myometrium. So there is also another theory, which is the retrograde menstruation theory, which is also proven for endometriosis, which applies for adenomyosis also. There are a few other things which we should think now are about the gene polymorphisms. As I told you, the gene polymorphism causing the increased production of the P450 enzyme and decreased metabolism of the estrogens. These two conditions which lead to higher risk of adenomyosis development. So, and the enzyme which I discussed, 17-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 2 enzyme, which is lacking in this group of women. So because of estrogen, because of hyperestrogenism, there is lack in the progesterone activity also. In a shorter way, it is a progesterone resistance. Progesterone, typically, it should counteract the estrogen promoted proliferation in healthy endometrium, but this is not in the case of adenomyosis. In these patients, the stromal cells of the endometrial functionalis and basalis show lower immunoreactivity to progesterone beta receptors in the endometrium compared to the disease-free. So there is a progesterone resistance. And also, there are few studies looking at the matrix metalloproteinases, MMP2 and 9, which were significantly found higher in the utopic endometrium of the adenomyotic patients. So also, also the simpler way, when you're taking the history, also it is important for us to go back and ask the patient if she's having a repeated curettage, any uterine surgeries, cesarean deliveries. Multiparous women are also prone for this tissue microtrauma in the uterus. So the other theory is the stem cell theory. As we know, the Mullerian ducts or primordial embryological structures that during fetal life develop to form the female uterine tract. So these ducts consist of surface epithelium and underlying urogenital ridge, and that will capacity is to differentiate into the glands and stroma. But there are some metaplastic changes of the intramyometrial embryonic pluripotent Mullerian remnants in the adult uterine wall, and that can possibly lead to the establishment of the ectopic endomyometrial tissue. So this, in conclusion, the first theory what we have discussed is the endomyometrial invagination. So this is proven effectively by various studies, whereas the stem cell theory needs further investigations because the theory is not still concluded. When we look into the morphological forms of the uterus, there are pinpoint small cystic areas of hemorrhage seen within the myometrium with hyperplastic myometrium. When you see microscopically, there are previously they used to diagnose in histopathology. So the criteria used to diagnose the adenomyosis on the histopathology was the distance between the lower border of the endometrium and the affected myometrial area of more than 1/2 of a low power field. Also, they looked at the endometrial glands and stroma that lay deeper than 2.5 mm below the endometrial surface on a low power field. So with the advent of the ultrasound technology, so the morphological and microscopic, that is histopathological diagnosis of endometriosis is not anymore. So coming into the classification, previously they used to classify it into as a deep, intermediate, and superficial when the total involvement of the uterus for adenomyosis, if it is greater than 80%, it is a deep adenomyosis. When it is between 40 to 80%, it is intermediate, and when it is superficial, less than 40 is superficial. So, but now the recent classification is after the ultrasound, where we can pick up the diffuse, focal, polypoidal, and special categories. Diffuse is the smooth muscle cell hyperplasia with the ectopic myometrium that is seen usually at the junctional zone. Focal can be a cystic or adenomyoma also. Polypoidal can be typical or atypical. And there are few other adenomyomas like the adenomyomas of the endocervical type, retroperitoneal adenomyosis, or rectovaginal endometriosis. So this is the picture showing focal, adenomyoma, and diffuse. Diffuse is spread everywhere. So the normal uterus, please look at the picture here. The junctional zone is normal, which is regular, which is not increased in the thickness. Whereas the second one, diffuse adenomyosis, the junctional zone is thickened. Whereas in the focal adenomyosis, the junctional zone is normal everywhere, but except for one area where it is thickened. So Ken Tamai from Japan classified this adenomyosis into 3 categories based upon the MRI. Now this MRI has an additional feature to further categorize this adenomyoma. It can pick up the adenomyoma, which is the most common presentations. The presentation of this condition is similar to that of leiomyoma. The clinical as well as the imaging pattern is same. The main advantage of this form is when an adenomyoma is picked up, it is easy because the surgically it can be removed when we compare to the diffuse forms. Adenomyosis polyps, this form usually presents as a pedunculated or sessile polyp mass in the lower uterine endometrium or ectocervix, usually occur in the premenopausal groups with the presentation of the abnormal genital bleeding. Cystic adenomyosis is the commonest one which we can see on ultrasound examination, ultrasound scanning. This variant is characterized by large hemorrhagic cyst resulting in extensive menstrual bleeding in the ectopic endometrial gland. So I'll be discussing these particular things on ultrasound, how to pick up. So what are the risk factors? Various studies have shown that the prevalence of adenomyosis was significantly associated with women's age. Previously, it was thought that the elderly age group women are the only category where the adenomyosis is affected because then the diagnosis was based upon the histopathology. But now it is because of the ultrasound, we are able to pick up this condition in younger age group women also. Gravity and parity, as the multiparous women have a more tendency for adenomyosis. Also, these multiparous women have a tendency to have elevated estrogen levels. And as we know, as I told you before, the elevated estrogen levels will lead to the trophoblast invasion into the myometrium. Also, the patients who are having early menarche, who had early menarche, shorter menstrual cycles and high BMI are prone for adenomyosis, whereas smoking is proven to be a safest, is looked at the safer aspect because as we know, it increases the progesterone rather than the estrogen, which is the either way in adenomyosis. Previous uterine surgery was suggested for theory of endometrial trauma. So any previous surgery, we will have to note it. Association with fibroid, association with endometriosis is going to score to have adenomyosis more. And the previous cesarean termination also. Tamoxifen therapy, if there is a history of tamoxifen therapy, tamoxifen binds to selective estrogen receptors and can stimulate both normal and ectopic endometrial tissue so that there can be a reason for them to develop adenomyosis. Looking into the symptoms, the age group usually presented was 40 to 50 previously. All of them used to have, the 65% of the patients had AUB and heavy menstrual bleeding 40 to 60%. This is secondary to the increased endometrial surface. As the endometrial surface is more, because the uterus is huge, the endometrial surface is huge, these patients will have longer days of menses and huge flow. Also pain, dysmenorrhea will be there. So in short, the patients will be presenting with heavy menstrual bleeding, prolonged menstrual bleeding, intermenstrual bleeding, or premenstrual spotting, and dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, and chronic pelvic pain, infertility, recurrent miscarriages, local pressure symptoms sometimes if there are huge adenomyomas, bladder and GI symptoms if the adenomyomas or concomitant association with the fibroids if they are pressing onto the bladder, or if the endometriosis association is more. So as I was discussing till now, the association between the fibroids and adenomyosis is 15 to 57%, and the adenomyosis and endometriosis, there is a broader range, 20 to 80%. And the ultrasound preoperative assessment, 47.8% of the patients undergoing surgery for deep infiltrating endometriosis were affected by adenomyosis. How does it is impacting the fertility? Because as we discussed, 25% nearly, when the 25% of the women at least less than 40 years and 22 less than 40 years are being affected with this condition, it is important for us to diagnose this condition prior so that this woman can be counseled properly for the options available currently. When you look the adenomyosis and recurrent pregnancy losses, the percentage is increased because of various pathologic mechanisms at the level of the uterus, at the level of the implantation, which is 38.2%. When a lady is giving a history of previous ART failure, you should be more cautious in evaluating because the incidence is 34.7%. So dysmenorrhea is the most commonest complaint by which our patients will be presenting. So that is, it occurs in 15 to 30% of the patients. Various mechanisms have been postulated for dysmenorrhea. A simple mechanism is vasopressin and oxytocin are the most important factors regulating the uterine contractions, and this vasopressin expression is associated with dysmenorrhea and adenomyosis. And then in this, uterine smooth muscle cells is positively correlated with the amplitude of the uterine contraction. So the higher vasopressin and the oxytocin, the higher the dysmenorrhea is. So coming into the diagnostic modalities, two primary modalities of diagnosis are imaging and histopathology. In current era, for the histopathology analysis is not being used because we have a very good imaging systems. So we have 2D and 3D. On a 2D ultrasound, the parameters which define adenomyosis are a globular asymmetrically enlarged uterus, which is having heterogeneous myometrial echo texture, maybe irregular cystic spaces also, and a linear striations which define the poor endomyometrial junction. And there is also asymmetry between the walls, asymmetrical myometrial thickening, and a diffuse spread of this myometrial vessels, which is also called as a translesional flow. And the myometrial cyst can be observed in 50% of the patients. This is the easiest way to pick up the adenomyotic patient on ultrasound examination. And adenomyoma is a focal circumscribed nodular collection of the ectopic endometrium commonly identified on the posterior wall. So on a 2D examination, we can, there is a formula to calculate the volume of the adenomyoma also. So uterine longitudinal diameter and a transverse diameter and AP diameter was higher in women without adenomyosis than those in adenomyosis. So when you look into the sensitivity and specificity of the 2D ultrasound to pick up this adenomyosis, when you look at the asymmetrical myometrial wall, myometrial cyst, hypoechoic linear striations, heterogeneous myometrium, all this have a very good sensitivity. But when you look at the junctional zone on a 2D ultrasound, it is difficult for a beginner or maybe for a senior also to pick up the junctional zone abnormality on a 2D. So here the 3D weighs an additional advantage. 3D, here we can measure the junctional zone in a coronal view. This is the hypoechoic area around the endometrium. So this is how it looks. This is the hypoechoic area around the endometrium. And you can measure the posterior junctional zone, anterior junctional zone, and the fundal junctional zone also. I mean, the junctional zone throughout the endometrium can be seen easily on a 3D. So here the 3D weighs advantage. The sensitivity is 82 and 87% for the junctional zone. So there is a MUSA consensus group, morphological uterus sonographic assessment group, where we have clearly, nicely described how to pick up what to see on ultrasound and how to report your ultrasound findings, because this is important for us to report also, because the current condition for a patient can be a minimal adenomyosis, but that can be aggravated later on. So in the pictures, the first thing is about the asymmetrical thickening, that is the anterior wall, posterior wall. Recently, there is literature about measuring the fundal adenomyosis also. So anterior, posterior, also fundal adenomyosis. The second is the hyperechoic islands on ultrasound examination will be seen anechoic. And the third image is the fan-shaped shadowing. So these fan-shaped shadowing can be seen on ultrasound examination when you decrease your color gain. Also, if you go one by one, there is a irregular junctional zone. There is a translesional flow, that is the blood flow perpendicular to the endometrial cavity. So this is a typical feature of the adenomyosis or adenomyoma. So irregular junctional zone and a breakage of junctional zone or interrupted junctional zone also can be seen. So this is the picture, A showing the interrupted and irregular junctional zone, and B showing a focal adenomyosis. So this is the fan-shaped shadowing or acoustic enhancement. So this is the junctional zone. So now, based upon 2D and 3D, this MUSA consensus have developed a protocol which includes the direct and indirect signs. The direct signs are, which are talking about the junctional zone, vascularity using color Doppler, the appearance of the myometrium, which can have a myometrial cyst, echogenic islands, lines, or buds. So these are the direct signs, and the indirect signs are the globular or asymmetrical enlargement of the uterus. So this reporting system should have all the including points mentioned in the slide. First thing is Adenomyosis, yes. How are you picking? What are the points favoring for you to describe the adenomyotic area or a component? Second, where is the location, whether it is in the anterior or posterior, right or left or fundus. The third is the type of the adenomyosis, whether it is focal or diffuse. And you can further describe if it is cystic or non-cystic also. And the newer thing is the junctional zone. Using your 3D ultrasound, you need to describe the type, layer type also. Type 1 is when there is a adenomyotic foci in the junctional zone, type 1. When it is in the middle myometrium, it is type 2. When it is in the outer myometrium, it is type 3. Now coming to the extent, now you can categorize the patient into mild, moderate, severe based upon the above findings, and then you can categorize your patient, and then you will have to describe the size. You have to give the information about the size of this adenomyosis, because it is important for a patient to further follow up. Now, after you are convinced with the adenomyosis or adenomyoma, there might be some other report from the patient telling that it can be a fibroid. So if it is a fibroid, how do you differentiate it between a fibroid and adenomyosis? A fibroid is a well-defined lobulated regular structure which is having a circumferential flow. So when you use your 2D and a color Doppler, it is easy to pick. Whereas the adenomyosis is an ill-defined, irregular, with a mixed echogenicity and a translesional flow. So this is how you pick up a adenomyoma. Now, when you look at the junctional zone on a 3D, the fibroid will not have any disturbances in the junctional zone unless there is an association for adenomyosis. Whereas in adenomyotic patient, the junctional zone will definitely show a component of the adenomyosis. So these are the differentiating features. HSG, which was used previously, the speculations, there can be seen some speculations measuring 1 to 4 mm length arising from the endometrium towards the myometrium, or a uterus with tuba erecta finding may be a suggestive of adenomyosis. I think we are no more longer using this modality to diagnose it. So there is a good review article on 2020, which is a recent one, exploring the challenges for a new classification of adenomyosis. And they have described very well about the adenomyosis, the diffuse, focal, and adenomyoma. They have given the scoring system based upon, first point is the uterine wall thickening. So we call, as we generally scan our patients, we look at the myometrial thickness, which when we call the increased thickness is above 1.5 centimeter each wall. So now they have took that thickness, and they say when the thickness of one wall, if it is affected, but if it is less than 2 centimeters, score 1. If it is affected, 2 walls, if it is less than 2, it is score 2. As the thickness goes up, if you can observe, score 3 and score 4 will be given for the thickness when it is more than 3 centimeter and 2 walls are affected. Okay. And the next point is at the junctional zone. Junctional zone, as we know, it less than 8 mm, 6 to 8 mm is fine. But when it is above 8 mm, 8 to 11 mm, moderate. And when it is above 11 and 12 mm, the scores will go up. And focal adenomyosis, lesion in outer myometrium and lesion in the junctional zone. So the lesions, when they are less than 1 centimeter, they are fine, whether in the junctional zone or outer myometrium. But when these lesions are growing above 2 mm, 20 mm or 2 centimeter, then these lesions will score high. And adenomyoma, a single adenomyoma less than 20 mm, yes, scoring less. Up to 30 mm, it is scoring less. But when it is between 20 to 30, scores 3, and when it is above 40 mm, it scores more. So this scoring system, I think we can start implementing, so that it decreases the intra-observer variability, also inter-observer variability, when you are seeing the patients on a regular mode. So color Doppler, as I discussed previously, using the color Doppler will improve the diagnostic accuracy of the ultrasound findings. The presence of the intramyometrial cysts, anechoic areas within the myometrial thickness of more than 1 mm, they are negative for color. When you have a doubt whether that is a blood vessel or a myometrial cyst, when you put your color Doppler on, definitely there will be no color picked up by this cyst. That is how you can pick. So normally between power Doppler and color Doppler, the power Doppler will weigh more for the diagnosis of adenomyosis. So this is how adenomyotic uterus look on a color Doppler, on a power Doppler. Both the pictures are there. And the third picture is the translesional flow. MRI is an excellent tool, as we all know, but it is relative cost procedure for the patient. And the main criteria for definition of adenomyosis on MRI, definitely most of us will not be going into the films. We will be seeing the reports only. But when we look into the reports also, slowly we will be understanding how they are actually giving these images. So enlarged uterus with presence of a distinct or an ill-defined myometrial mass with indistinct margins of primarily low intensity images, diffuse or local widening of the junctional zone on T2 Wade image, increased junctional zone thickness of more than or equal to 0.15 mm. This could be localized or diffuse. So this junctional zone, as I told you, it is the hypoecho area surrounding the endometrium. So less than 8 mm excludes mostly adenomyosis, but not rule out. 8 to 12 mm, the other criteria also you should add it. The other criteria at the junctional zone are maximal junctional zone thickness to the myometrium thickness ratio. When it is above 40%, there is an increased chances of adenomyosis. And the other criteria to be considered is the difference between the maximum and the minimum thickness of the junctional zone when it is more than 5 mm. More than 12 mm seems to be highly predictive on adenomyosis. So less than 8, you can mostly exclude. When it is above 12, you are concluding there is adenomyosis. Between 8 to 12, you need to add the extra parameters for you to decide. So this is the MRI image. Thickening of the junctional zone, picture A is showing, and the ratio of the junctional zone maximum to the total myometrium when it is above 40%. Example, if you ask me on a 2D ultrasound, if the same image can look like an posterior wall asymmetrical thickening. So this is how ultrasound can be used to actually avoid MRI when it is not required in most of the cases. So adenomyosis on MRI, they can further classify it. Adenomyomas also they can further. Adenomyosis, focal, superficial, and diffuse. Adenomyomas, depending upon the region where they are there, like subserosal, submucosal, and intramural. Intramural if they are solid or cystic. And also there are external adenomyosis, posterior external, anterior external, apart from the myometrium. So what is literature telling about the MRI? So there is one good study which looked into, which is a systematic review, included the MRI and ultrasound. So they included 23 articles involving 2,300 women. They found that the transvaginal ultrasound had a pooled sensitivity of 72% and a specificity of 81%. And MRI had 77 and 89%. They concluded that both the imaging modalities, that is ultrasound, TVS, and MRI, had high levels of accuracy in diagnosing the adenomyosis. Now, what are the emerging techniques and other techniques which we can use? One is sonohystrography. This is simply called assays. We can also call SIS. So in this, the installation of the saline into the uterine cavity will show the continuity between the subendometrial cystic spaces, characteristic of the disease, and the endometrial cavity. So that is the only additional benefit we can pick up from SIS. SIS is not used to diagnose adenomyosis. It is when it is done for any other lesion, or when you are doing an SIS for a polyp or a fibroid, you can pick adenomyosis with this. Hysteroscopy, as we all know, hysteroscopy allows the direct visualization of the uterine cavity, but it is only about the inner endometrium, or it gives a superficial myometrium information, but not about the total myometrium details. So how does it look? On a hysteroscopy, the endometrial looks hypervascular. There will be a strawberry pattern, endometrial defects, and submucosal hemorrhagic cysts can also be seen. So hysteroscopic view of irregular endometrial mucosa due to the presence of tiny openings on the endometrial surface. These images suggest there could be a possibility of adenomyosis, but you need to confirm with the USG again. So this is a strawberry pattern with signs of hyperemia and the areas appearing brighter red with the white central dots. So this is the hysteroscopic image of a small hemorrhagic foci, assuming a chocolate brown color, suggestive of adenomyosis. Now, this is the newer thing, uterine spirometry device. In last few years, a new fusion technique integrating US and hysteroscopy, combining both, has been introduced, and it offers the possibility of obtaining the myometrial biopsies by using a spirometry device under ultrasound guidance in the suspected areas. So when you are scoping and also doing an ultrasound. When you have the suspected areas, you can biopsy it. And the endomyometrial biopsy showed a specificity of 78% with a low sensitivity of 53%. And because of due to the high incidence of the false negative because of deep adenomyosis, you assumed when you pick up the area from this device, and if you cannot exclude adenomyosis because the area you are seeing in hysteroscopy is only the superficial part. So this warrants future studies also, and it is cost effective. It is an invasive technique, so maybe this cannot be used regularly for our patients, but yes, in future studies, if are warranted to further comment about this particular thing. Elastography, the principle of this elastography involves the light external tissue compression that produces a strain or displacement within the tissue, similar to palpation. So what is this elastography? It is giving an information about the tissue on an ultrasound. So this tissue stiffness is reflected with the colors red, blue, and green. So, but why are we not using this? Because it is studied on fibroids, but not mostly on adenomyosis. And there are controversial evidences about this elastography. The literature says that the hard lesions are the adenomyotic harder structures are having the soft tissue, and the either way in ultrasound. So inconsistent findings, and they are unclear. So future studies comparing elastography, and there should be a strict ultrasonographic criteria and with histology are warranted before we introduce this into the clinical practice. HIFU, high intensity focus ultrasound, because I wanted to cover here because we are discussing the imaging modalities. It coagulates necrosis obtained. The coagulation necrosis obtained with HIFU is much less painful compared to the ischemic necrosis by the uterine artery embolization. The major shortcoming of this technology is HIFU. It is studied in fibroids, not in adenomyosis, and maybe there should be an adequate literature, because till date we don't have any good information about the patients who underwent HIFU and a subsequent conception by naturally or an ART. And the patients or the prerequisites for HIFU are no lower abdominal previous surgeries, no suspicion of pelvic adhesions, and a body weight of less than 100 kgs, and an abdominal wall thickness of less than 5 centimeter, and lesions in that can be treated have a diameter of 3 to 10. So because of these prerequisites, many of the patients will not fall into the category of selection. And there is a study which looked into almost 10,000 women, in which 2,549 women had adenomyosis. The most common adverse reactions were the vaginal secretions for less than 2 to 3 weeks, and lower abdominal pain, which lasted for more than 24 hours. 0.6% only had serious complications, and no permanent injury or fatal complications occurred. HIFU appears to be safe, effective in the management of symptomatic adenomyosis, and can be considered as an alternative uterine sparing surgery option for women with this condition. At present, more data are needed to recommend this treatment to women who wish to preserve their fertility for future. So now that we have discussed about the adenomyosis investigations, treatment modalities, types of adenomyosis. Now, how do we treat the woman? Now, depends upon purely the age of the woman. And then if the woman is looking for a fertility option and a non-fertility option, I would like to cover the fertility the people who want to go for fertility, and then how do we treat them? So we have two. Treatment can be divided into medical and surgical. The medical options include non-hormonal and hormonal. The non-hormonal options, this is a very good review article, which is 2007. So this looked into the investigation and management of adenomyosis in women who wish to improve or preserve fertility. They covered everything. So I would like to discuss that article. The first one is medical. Medical NSAIDs, yes, women with dysmenorrhea, NSAIDs can be given, but that is temporary. When you look into the anti-angiogenic agents, these two are non-hormonal. Anti-angiogenic, why are we talking? Because neovascularization forms an integral part in the pathogenesis of adenomyosis. So there are emerging concepts about the growth factor inhibitors, endogenous angiogenesis inhibitors, and various other immunomodulators. So these drugs have still been used in experimental settings and are great potential for future further research. Currently, we don't have any evidence for this. Looking at the hormonal therapy, oral contraceptive pills, patients may show symptomatic improvement of dysmenorrhea and heavy bleeding when on OCPs, and they can be used oral or parenteral or intravaginal or IUD. And the main mechanism is to prevent the ovulation and thereby hormonal action. So they are just switching off the ovulation. Maybe this is not suitable for the women who are simultaneously planning for a pregnancy. Danazol, yes, danazol can be given oral, intracervical, or can be loaded onto an intrauterine device. It acts by suppressing the pituitary release of FSH and LH, therefore it causes the atrophy of both normal and ectopic endometrial tissue. The systematic treatment with danazol has been shown to decrease the expression of the aromatase P450 in diseased utopic endometrium, and this may contribute to decrease in the symptoms and uterine size. Oral, it is not well tolerated by many patients because of its side effects like acne, depression, hot flushes, decreased high density lipoprotein, and increased liver function concentration. So, but it is well tolerated in IUD. Like when it is loaded in an intrauterine device. These methods allow the local delivery of the hormones in an attempt to minimize the systemic side effects. So there is one study which looked into the cervical danazol suspension injections, which they give intracervical, and reported that all the women have had subjective improvement of symptoms by 24th week. There was a significant symptomatic relief and an immediate return of fertility after withdrawing the administration of the danazol. So I think, yes, danazol can be given. So the next one is the selective estrogen receptor modulators. Ideal SERM should have an antagonist at estrogen, and it should be an antagonist at endometrium and agonist in the bone and serum. But the ideal SERM is actually, there is no ideal SERM, and there is no proper consensus to use SERMs for adenomyosis. Selective progesterone receptor modulators, yes, we got a ulipristal recently in 2016, but it is actually, there are a few studies which looked in huge population when given orally for 5 to 10 mg doses for 12 weeks. There is a decrease in pain symptoms and also improvement in the bleeding, but then there is worsening of the symptoms also, and because of its side effects, liver, at the level of the liver, this drug has been recently banned again. So progestins, as we know, medroxyprogesterone acetate and norethisterone are more commonly used in cases of adenomyosis. Studies have shown symptomatic benefit in terms of pain and bleeding for these patients. Dynogest is a very good one. It exerts anti-ovulatory and mild hypoestrogenic effects as well as anti-proliferative effect. So it is given and the drug is also well tolerated by many of the patients, and a randomized double-blind trial, it is a phase 3 study in patients conducted in Japan. The efficacy and safety of the drug is proven, and there are no major side effects. Antiprogesterons, gestrinone, have been used for treatment of adenomyosis, but no much data about this. GnRH agonists, yes, it is a which is a very common one, which everyone we use it. It causes suppression of the pituitary gonadotropins and thus cause the uterine quiescence. That means it just switch off the ovaries. It is a medical menopause, hypoestrogenic state, and thereby reducing the manifestations of the adenomyosis. The mode of action is the subcutaneous forms, intranasal sprays also. But the side effects are hot flushes, vaginal atrophy, and accelerated bone demineralization. So when you are giving GnRH depot for a longer period, maybe you need to add back your therapy. You need to add back your estrogen and progesterone to combat the side effects. Aromatase inhibitors. The disadvantage of the GnRH depot is it is a temporary, because many of the patients will actually, the uterine volumes and the sizes are actually back again when this drug effect is gone. So further research is required to determine the duration of the GnRH analog treatment that will result in a symptomatic improvement while mimicking the risk of the long-term side effects and delay in patients wanting to conceive. Aromatase inhibitors, when they are combined with progestins and OCPs, yes, they reduce the severity when the patient is having severe pain and when we are looking to improve her quality of life. LNG-IUS is a very good option. Its main mechanism is it releases 20 micrograms of flavonogestrel per day up to 5 years. It downregulates the estrogen receptors at the level of the uterus with no systemic side effects. It's an excellent option for the women who are having AUB, who are having symptomatic, dysmenorrhea, excess bleeding, and also who are actually going for an IVF for a frozen embryo transfer, then we can go for a oocyte or embryo cryopreservation, and then at the same sitting maybe we can put an LNG-IUS inside. Also it can be combined with GnRH agonist depot or an aromatase inhibitor or an selective progesterone receptor modulators. There are many studies looking at the combined options also. But the side effects, few people will complain, are persistent irregular bleeding or spotting. So overall patient satisfaction rate is 72.5%, and it may be promising therapy for adenomyosis. Estrogen receptor inhibitor is fulvestrant, a potent pure anti-estrogen approved by FDA in 2002, but there are no literature, there is no good literature about this, and the further trials we need about its efficacy and also safety. So as we discuss the medical options, when we look at the surgical option, when we need to actually operate any lady for adenomyosis, or once you have decided to operate an adenomyoma when it is more than 3 centimeter or 4 centimeter, or when it is causing a pressure effect on the endometrium, there are ablational and excisional procedures also, but these ablative and excisional procedures are not done for the fertility patients. So I would like to discuss only about the adenomyoma excision for today. And this can be done laparoscopically, vaginally, or hysteroscopic means, depending upon the location size of the lesion. The adenomyomectomy was performed by mini laparotomy, ultra mini laparotomy, or laparoscopy, and the clinical pregnancy rate of these women post surgery was 77.5%. But the disadvantage are the success following excisional treatment is on an average of 50%, and the risk of relapse is there. And uterine artery embolization is another method for managing symptoms of adenomyosis. Patients report improvement in the symptoms following uterine artery embolization, with significant improvement in the symptoms like menstrual bleeding and dysmenorrhea. But there are few side effects, and not many centers can offer this uterine artery embolization because we need an intervention radiologist for this, and few patients can present with pelvic pain, nausea, fever, and ischemic necrosis also. Myometrial electrocoagulation can be done when a lady is not she is not relieved with the medical options, or there is an extensive adenomyosis where surgery cannot be performed. Myometrial electrocoagulation is the next option. But the disadvantage is because when we electrocoagulate or surgically excise this, there may be a chance of uterine rupture, and therefore permanent contraception sometimes may be advised for these patients. And myometrial reduction is in a simpler way. Most of the surgeons are actually performing this myometrial reduction by 3 approaches. First is the classical reduction method, where the uterus is dissected longitudinally in the midline, and there is resection of the anterior posterior portions of the myometrium. But there is a higher risk of women going either for a relapse, or that woman symptoms are not actually gone, and she might require a cystectomy. This is what literature is telling about. But there is a modified version of the surgery, which is a transverse H incision. Here the incision are given 1 vertical and 2 crossing horizontal incisions, allowing easier removal of the considerable amounts of the adenomyotic tissue. And the modified group had greater improvement in the pain, reproductive function, and also lower risk of perforation. So there is one method, a triple flap method described by Osada et al. Here they reconstructed the uterine wall with the triple flap repair. 104 patients involving more than 80% of the anterior posterior uterine walls and more than 6 centimeter of the wall thickness, which is confirmed by MRI and ultrasound. They have chosen this group of women. Intraoperatively, the uterus was delivered out, and then there is a supracervical tourniquet which was applied. Following this, the uterus was then bisected in the midline and the sagittal plane until the cavity was opened. This is how the surgical images look. So anterior and posterior, both the walls are opened, and then the content is removed, adenomyotic content, and this is the kind of the sutures they used to prevent the risk of rupture in the future. So, but the main advantage was that utilizing this method was to reduce the risk of rupture. But the main disadvantage is the reduction of the uterine volume, which might hamper the future pregnancy outcome. So any surgical method has its own benefits and also cons, pros and cons. So it is important for us to decide which patient to be operated, what is the method of surgery, and whether it is laparoscopically or open. So we discussed open, and this is laparoscopic occlusion of bilateral uterine arteries. So there is a recent 2017 article which did 105 patients and with a 7-month follow-up. And they found that the symptoms of pain and dysmenorrhea were less with these patients, but this study didn't follow for the patients who are going for a embryo transfer, or they didn't look in a fertility group of women. Now, laparoscopic surgeries are definitely done by very good laparoscopic surgeons. They resect the adenomyomatous tissue either using monopolar needle or laser knife. They put into the endo bag and then remove it out. But yes, that there can be a chances of spillage when you are using a morcellator. So this is the slightest drawback of this method. But the suturing is also the same used in the double flap method. So what is the uterine rupture risk? Non-scarred uterus, we know it is 0.05%. Scarred uterus, it is 0.04 to 0.2%, 0.02. Vaginal VBAC, we know 0.2 to 0.7. Till here we know. But what is the risk after uterine adenomyosis? It is 6%. So the scar rupture risk is more. So our aim of surgery should be do the surgery as good as possible, so that that woman will not be left with very less uterine tissue, and also she will not land up in a uterine rupture in her pregnancy. So the factors causing uterine ruptures are the removal method, the degree of the adenomyosis, the extent and size, the method of reconstructing the uterine cavity, postoperative wound infection, hematoma formation, period of contraception you used, and skill of the surgeon finally matters. What about the contraception? Can you stop your patient from conceiving? Will that help for the patient not to have a risk of rupture in future? There is no limit. There is no correct consensus about this, because many facilities use 3 months to 6 months to 12 months. So there is no certain correlation between the duration of the contraception period and the incident of uterine ruptures. Laparotomy versus laparoscopic surgery, there is no evidence indicating the best clinical and reproductive technology between the laparoscopy and laparotomy. But yes, when you are doing an adenomyoma, because it is a hard tissue, it requires proper excision. Therefore, the diffused lesion must be thoroughly excised by laparotomy, preferably assisted by laparoscopically. Robotic, 2010 was the first paper which looked into the robotic assisted adenomyoma excision. It was a successful one, and many robotic surgeons are available for us to do the surgeries. MRI guided focused ultrasound surgery for adenomyosis. I think I discussed this in the previous slide. Now, in a simpler note, the management can be designed to conceive, decide not to wish for fertility. If yes, it can be an ART, freeze your embryos, do medical management, or do adenomyomectomy, and then transfer your embryos. The women who are not wishing to conceive, they can go for uterine artery embolization and hysterectomy. So this is one article which looked into the investigation and management of adenomyosis who wish to preserve fertility. What about the GnRH analogs before IVF? Yes, there is good evidence of literature supporting for the improvement in the embryo implantation and clinical pregnancy rates when you give the agonist before IVF. And IVF, when it is done two stage, that is segmental IVF. When you do ovarian stimulation, preserve your oocytes or embryos, and then do transfer, it has a very good success rates. And this is the article which looked into the fresh versus frozen embryo transfer in women following gonadotropin releasing hormone agonist treatment. In this is a retrospective study of 241 patients. They compared between the GnRH agonist pre-treated group. Then they said that the stimulation duration was high, in the gonadotropin dose was high, but the number of oocytes retrieved and the high quality embryos are more when the woman is treated with the GnRH agonist pre-treatment. Mock embryo transfer, it is important for us to perform because adenomyotic uteruses are actually very different. They are not easy. The negotiation might not be easy. So it is important for us to perform a mock embryo transfer. Single embryo transfer, it should be encouraged because it has been reported to associated with a preterm delivery or preeclampsia or a second trimester miscarriage because of its pathologic environment in the uterus. So it should be discussed with the patient when a lady is operated and non-operated. Mild moderate cases, yes, double embryo transfer can be preferred, but when a lady is operated for a myomectomy and when it is a severe adenomyosis, to prevent her further antenatal complications, SCT should be encouraged. Which type of protocol is actually best? The literature says that the downregulated HRT is the best. They looked at the clinical pregnancy, implantation, and ongoing pregnancy rates, and they are very good for the downregulated compared to the non-downregulated ones. What about the uterine contractility and atosiban therapy? There is one article looked into it, because this uterine tissue trauma and hyperperistalsis in the endometrium or myometrium in the adenomyosis group is already proven. They said that the atosiban therapy can be a benefit for this group of women at the level of the implantation. So what about the window of implantation in this? Yes, this is a very good article, 2018, Nalini Mahajan. She studied about this, and this in particular RAF group of women, and they said that window of implantation is displaced, and all the RAF and adenomyosis associated group of women should undergo an ERA testing, that is endometrial receptivity test, before embryo transfer in order not to waste the good quality embryos. So what about the focal and diffuse adenomyosis reproductive outcomes? To our surprise, we think that the diffuse adenomyosis is a mild severity, and this is what we tell our patients. But this is the article systematic review, and they say that overall patients with focal adenomyosis appear to have higher pregnancy rates after surgery. Focal, yes, if you remove, the pregnancy rates are very good compared to the diffuse ones, because diffuse ones cannot be treated neither medically or surgically, because the diffuse ones is already affected. The uterus is already affected in various regions. And the higher incidence of uterine rupture was reported after surgery for the diffuse, for the same reason, because when we try to operate for a diffuse adenomyosis, there will be multiple sites where we open or puncture, and that leads to the increased rupture. So I have just summarized my presentation in few questions. So the first question is, what is the role correlation of adenomyosis and infertility? It ranges from 21 to 25%, the association. What is the likelihood of clinical pregnancy in patients with this group of women undergoing IVF ICSI? So 28 to 30%, there is a less chance that this group can have a lesser clinical pregnancy when we compare to the normal infertile population. Does it affect the implantation rates in IVF? There are various studies. A few studies said it's detrimental. Few studies said it is not significantly different, and we need further studies to comment about the implantation rates. But in a practical way to think, because we already discussed the endomyometrial pathogenic mechanism, which is leading to the reduced clinical pregnancy, yes, there can be a decreased implantation rates also when these people are compared with the normal ones. And what is the difference in the technique of surgical management? As we discussed, the classical method, which is not used by many surgeons now, the new modified reduction surgery by the means of the transverse H incision technique or laparoscopically done surgeries, way better than the open surgeries. What is the better screening modality, MRI or transvaginal? In both the cases, the sensitivity and specificity are same. So in order to cut down the cost of the patient, the simpler lesions and the normal lesions can be picked up on ultrasound. Only the MRI can be advised for the patients with complicated adenomyoma association with endometriosis and fibroids. The MRI weighs better. Does conservative surgery help in patients with adenomyosis? The conservative technique described in all the studies involves excision of the tissue and adenomyoma, and hysteroscopy, either laparoscopy or via laparotomy. The overall live birth is 36.2% following the conservative surgery. It should be individualized for the patient if it is required. Can UAE be done in infertility patients? The effectiveness of UAE in the management of adenomyosis as an outcome has been observed in 2005. A live birth rate of 83.3% of 5 of 6 patients was observed after the follow-up of 35 months. But this is the only article which looked at. We need further more studies, review articles and meta-analysis to come up to advise for our patients regularly. What is the correlation of adenomyosis with obstetric outcome? As we all know, there is increased risk of preterm delivery and premature rupture of membranes and uterine rupture. The literature also is also supporting the same. And to conclude, to summarize, adenomyosis is a common condition not only found in the multiparous population, but also has an increasing incidence among the infertile patients. It is a majorly undiscussed and researched topic. There are no formal guidelines given by any apical body in this regards. Unlike endometriosis, the surgical modality is not the preferred modality in patients with infertility. There are no single specific diagnostic criteria for diagnosis of the condition. Although MRI has a better diagnostic value as compared to other modalities, still on the cost benefit analysis, a good 3D ultrasound also is equally effective in diagnosing adenomyosis. And newer drugs like Dynogest and Ulipristal have shown symptomatic improvement in this condition. I think this presentation was helpful in any way for you. Thank you for your patient hearing. So any
Doctor,
questions?
you can click on stop sharing. Yeah. So it was a very nice session, Dr. Kavya. So we have one question here.
Yeah.
What is the role of anastrozole for 3 months prior to IVF?
Yeah, anastrozole and or letrozole, they are proven good at the level of the endometrium, and anastrozole combined with the GnRH agonist. When it is letrozole 2.5 mg once daily, combined with the GnRH agonist, have proven benefited for the patients.
So from the participants, if anyone is having any doubt, they can unmute themselves. I have just given them permission. So doctors, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question directly from the doctor herself in case if you have any doubts. Otherwise, we can wrap up the session. Okay, so we don't have any other question, doctor. So it was a very nice session. Thank you so much. Nice collaborating with you. Looking forward to many more classes with you
Thank
on
you.
different topics. Thank you so much.
Emcure, and thank you all the audience. And I request everyone to stay safe and be careful about the surroundings because the COVID is really high. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you. I'll just end the session.